From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the Acres USA podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, and today we're incredibly excited to welcome Dr. Alan Williams, one of the world's leading experts in adaptive grazing and nutrient density in food production. Dr. Williams has over 4 decades of experience in the field with a focus on developing regenerative systems that not only improve soil health and animal welfare, but also increase farm profitability. As a 6th-generation family farmer, Alan is renowned for his innovative work in adaptive grazing management and has worked with farmers across the globe to enhance ecological and economical sustainability on their operations. He's a founding partner of Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy, organizations dedicated to helping farmers rebuild healthy ecosystems through regenerative practices. Dr. Williams' work has been instrumental in showing how farmers and ranchers can produce nutrient-dense foods while improving the resilience of their land. We'll be discussing his journey into the position that he's in today, the importance of adaptive grazing, and how farmers can start implementing these practices to see real results. Alan is also one of our keynote speakers at EcoAg 2024, December 2nd through the 5th, and they're Understanding Ag. Dr. Alan Williams, Gabe Brown, and their team are doing a 2-day workshop as part of EcoAg U on December 2nd and 3rd, and then are a major part of our conference throughout the rest of the conference. So, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Alan Williams. Alrighty, I'm joined with Alan Williams from Understanding Ag. Alan, thanks for joining the Acres USA podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you in December at our conference. I guess first, for our audience, you want to kind of introduce yourself and then what Understanding Ag is doing currently. I know you guys are busy, and how you got into creating Understanding Ag with Gabe Brown.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that. So first, I am a 6th-generation family farmer. I grew up on my family's farm in South Carolina. They've been there since 1840, but however, I ended up going into academia and was a university researcher and professor for about 15 years and ended up in the state of Mississippi. So we now own a farm here in Mississippi. And so I farm separate from my family now, not because of any issues with my family, but because I moved. But, you know, through the 90s and the early 2000s, I had a lot to learn relative to what we call today regenerative farming. We didn't call it that then. We didn't know what to call it. We just knew we had to do something very different to be successful because the conventional wasn't working. And around the same time period, unbeknownst to both of us, Gabe was experiencing the same thing on his farm up in North Dakota. And so we were both going through big transitions in our lives and trying to figure this farming thing out and how to do it successfully and profitably and in a way that was sort of more in sync with nature and ecosystem processes. And I'll have to say that, you know, where I was located, especially, there were no mentors. You know, at that time period, there wasn't anybody else doing it that way down here that I knew about. And so I would, and I didn't know Gabe at that point. So again, just complete trial and error and just figuring out what worked and what didn't, making tons of observations and trying to rectify those observations with what needed to happen to be profitable. Then I got heavily involved in the grass-fed beef sector and was actually one of the early pioneers in that regard, and even wrote, one of the earliest set of protocols that has now in some form or fashion been copied by almost every branded program out there. And in becoming heavily involved in that, I and a small group of folks formed what is called the Grass-Fed Exchange. And so for a number of years, we conducted conferences all over the U.S. called the Grass-Fed Exchange Conference, and that is how I initially met Gabe Brown. So we invited Gabe one year to be a speaker at the Grass-Fed Exchange, and that allowed he and I to begin to get to know each other. And then we found ourselves both on the speaking circuit quite a bit at a lot of the same conferences and workshops. And so we continued to exchange notes, so to speak. And one of the things that we quickly discovered was that we had been doing very similar things, even though we were in dramatically different environments.
Yeah.
North Dakota versus Mississippi, it's hard to get much different in North America,
What would you
than
say
both.
some of your biggest challenges in Mississippi are? Because it's obviously much different
Well,
than North Dakota.
yep, yep. I mean, certainly one is our summers, right?
Yeah.
Our heat and humidity. I mean, you've got to have livestock and crops that are adapted to the heat and humidity that we experience, and then we have very wet winters. That can be quite muddy and just at times miserable. Whereas Gabe talks about, for the winter, he's got basically frozen concrete,
Yeah,
for ground instead of mud.
I agree. I don't, and you get to set your bales out, and it's almost like an off season in a way.
Right,
Because mud season
right.
it's annoying. You have to move them a lot, and you're always concerned about all the problems that come with it.
And we have a much, much longer mud season down here.
Yeah.
It lasts for months and months for us, and until we get to late spring, essentially. And of course, the other thing that we have to deal with on a year-round basis are all of our bugs and our parasites and everything else. We don't get any, a decent enough freeze to kill that kind of stuff off. So whether we're talking about internal parasites, ticks, mosquitoes, flies, you keep naming them, they're pretty much a year-round problem for us.
Yeah.
Without a heck of a lot of relief. So those are some of the major differences between us and Gabe. But what struck us though was that even though we had all of these major differences, and he had his unique set of challenges, I had mine, we were finding that we were basically adhering to the same principles. And that the principles worked for him and they worked for me. We just had to apply them within our context. And I still remember, I don't remember what conference it was at, but it was 2016. And the four original partners, all of us were at this conference. So that was Gabe Brown, myself, Ray Archuleta, and David Brandt. And we were at dinner one evening and we were talking about all that we were doing individually, the speaking, the consulting, everything else to try to help others to learn how to do this. And that evening at dinner, we looked at each other and said, why don't we do this together? And so you've heard the story about businesses being designed on the back of a napkin, and that is exactly what we did. That evening, we took a napkin and we sort of outlined our new business. And in that very first year, we quickly learned that we needed an educational arm. So we formed the Soil Health Academy. And so that was the genesis of Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy. And at that time, when we started, we funded ourselves. We didn't go out and seek debt or investor funding, and we haven't to this day. So to this day, we have no debt and we have no investor funding in Understanding Ag. We're 100% self-funded. But we decided that we wanted our vision and mission to be to spread the hope of regenerative agriculture on as large a landscape scale as we possibly could, both here in North America and then globally. And the second part of our mission, which was equally important, was to radically improve the quality of life of farmers and ranchers, because we were seeing that dramatically go downhill with anxiety, depression, and even suicide levels among our profession. So we wanted to do everything that we could, to help begin to alleviate those types of things. And in the intervening years, since founding our company in 2016, uh, we have gone from basically 0 acres in 2016 to more than 35 million acres that we're working across today in the U.S., and that's not counting global acres. And we have since been able to work in all 50 U.S. states and in dozens and dozens of countries globally. So we've worked with farmers and ranchers on 6 continents, and we have been able to teach academies, around the world as well. So here in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and other countries. So our reach has become global, and we have discovered that essentially it's the same problems everywhere we go. It really doesn't change. It's almost the exact same set of problems, but that's bad news and good news. It's bad news in that while we keep repeating the same mistakes everywhere around the world over and over, but the good news is that because it's the same mistakes, the same solutions apply. So the things that we implement here with the principles also work anywhere else that we go. So, we feel very blessed and privileged that we've been able to grow and expand our footprint and our reach, to that extent in less than a decade. And we're very excited about the next decade and what that's going to bring. We already know that there's going to be significant progress made, and we're anticipating that by the end of 2026, here in the U.S. alone, we're going to be on more than 50 million acres.
Well, congrats on that. That's really impressive. You guys have done an amazing thing with that, and it shows that the different types of education are important. I went through your soil health academy during my first, or I went through your online course during my first couple of years of grazing, and it was really important because it's straight to the point. You get all the facts really quickly. It's well put together. If you don't mind, I like to go back and talk more about the farm that you grew up on.
Mm-hmm.
What type of operation was it? And I'm always curious of what things, when you left the farm, you went to academia. When did it start clicking in your mind that like maybe we need to do some things a little bit differently?
That is a very good question, and I do share that story a lot because it's actually very pertinent to where I'm at today, and why I do what I do today. So, again, it was a multi generational family farm. Had been in the family since 1840, and that was a branch of the family that had moved down from Virginia to South Carolina in 1840 to purchase that land. And in so through the years that I was there on the farm growing up in the 60s and the 70s, there were always multiple families supported by the farm. So it was never just one immediate family like we often see today, right? It was my immediate family, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of that. So all through that time period, those 6 generations, they had been able to support multiple families off of this farm. And it was a very diverse farm. When I was growing up, we had multiple species of livestock. We had some dairy cows, some beef cows, pigs, sheep, goats, various types of poultry. We also had peaches and apples and pears and those types of things. Though in the Piedmont of South Carolina, there were a lot of peach orchards and apple orchards when I was growing up. So we were participatory in that. We had market gardens. We grew some crops, and we had a general store. So to relate it to today, we were doing a lot of sort of pasture-based production in multi-species, and we were direct marketing. Yeah,
Hmm.
now we didn't use those terms then. My family didn't know those terms. All they knew was they were farming and they had a general store. Yeah. Um, and we didn't use, when I was growing up, and I don't know why we just didn't, but we didn't use the chemicals and the synthetic fertilizers and those types of things. So, you know, we made it, and we made a living for all of those families. But then I went away to college, and I got educated, and I say that in quotes. And I quickly was told that the way that we had done things when I was growing up was wrong, and that didn't work anymore, and that we needed to do things very differently. We needed to specialize in agriculture, and there were a lot of inputs we weren't using that we needed to use. And being gullible, susceptible as a college student, well, you know what? I bought into it. And I actually found myself coming home and telling my family, boy, we need to get with it. You know, we're way behind the times. I mean, this is what my professors are telling me and so forth. And so I remember having, you know, some arguments with my family, and that, you know, we needed to get with the modern times here. We got to feed the world. And by golly, we weren't being as participatory as we should have been as a family farm in doing that. And so I ended up being taught into going to graduate school and getting my master's and a PhD. And at that time, I felt obligated to go into academia, so I did. And so I became very commodity minded, conventionally minded, and that was the research we were doing, was all targeted towards conventional farming and ranching, and basically testing a lot of products, a lot of technologies at that time. And I was bought in hook, line, and sinker. And I thought I was doing my part to save the world and to save agriculture. But, and I was in there 15 years. I remember it was around year 9 or 10 that I started to have some aha moments, and some moments that I had to begin to deeply question what I was doing. I began to realize that with all of this research we were doing on products and technologies and so forth, that our livestock were not getting better, they weren't getting healthier, and they certainly weren't generating more net profit. And that our soils were continuing to degrade instead of improving. And even worse, net profit margins and equity in farms was steadily eroding. And it was getting harder and harder for people to bring their kids and grandkids back to the farm and continue multi-generational farming and ranching. And at that point, I began to look backwards in retrospect at my growing up years. And I began to realize, wow, we didn't use any of the products and technologies that I was now endorsing and researching. And we supported multiple generations, and each generation quite easily took over from the prior and continued that success of the farm. How in the heck did we do that? You know, and so then I had to question myself as a university researcher and professor, and what in the heck was I doing? And was I really making things worse or better? And as I examined that more and more and examined myself, I began to realize that the vast majority of what I was doing and what I was participatory in within the university system, I now call putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. Everything that we were doing was relative to treating symptoms and never resolving the root cause of our problems. And then I had to ask myself, why? Why were we just treating symptoms and never getting at the root cause of a problem? And that didn't take me long to figure that out. Well, where are all the grant dollars coming from for even my own research? They were for the products and the technologies that treat symptoms and never address the root cause. And at that point, here I am, I'm a tenured full professor. So I sort of have it made in that world, right? So I had a big decision to make. I'm 15 years in. I can do another 15 and retire with full pension, all benefits, everything, good to go. Or I get out. And that was a scary proposition to me. But I made the decision to leave, to resign my position at the university, and that I was going to go back into farming and ranching full time, but I was going to do it very differently. And I was going to also work with others to do the same thing.
What
Now,
was what was
ironically,
what was some of
yeah,
the
go ahead.
what was some of the feedback you got from the people that you were working with? I mean, you probably were like, "Hey, this kind of seems like it's not necessarily working." Was there anyone else around you that agreed with you, or is it just it was all blinders on?
No, no, I had no colleagues that agreed with me. At around those last few years in academia, they began to think I had lost my mind, and I was nuts, and that Alan had started thinking crazy things, and at first, to be honest with you, I was determined I was going to try to make a difference within academia, right? But I quickly discovered there was no research dollars for regenerative research. They didn't exist at that point in time. And so I wasn't going to be able to generate research dollars to do what I wanted to do. And in academia, that that's death. If you can't bring in outside funds.
If you want to
So
explain quickly how that
yeah.
works, how do they get the funding? Who funds these researches?
Oh gosh. The honest truth is absolutely anybody you can get funding from.
Yeah.
Okay. But so who are, some of the most prolific funders? Well, it's the obvious. One is, our government. So the USDA and other sectors of the government. And then the other is major agribusiness corporations, in my line of work, right?
So a lot of your
So,
job was actually almost being a salesperson and making these connections, and that was
yeah,
your responsibility, or they had someone else that would make those connections and try to.
well, they wanted, when a major agribusiness corporation funds something through a university, obviously they're searching for that university stamp of approval. That they can put on their pamphlets, their POS material, all of that. Their websites that such and such university says that our products or our technology does this. So you, the farmer, you, the rancher, ought to use this product or technology. That really is what they're seeking. Absolutely. Why else would they fund the
Yeah.
research?
So from your perspective, it's tough to actually be critical of the product. Were you ever actually critical and got pushback?
Well, I had three different times in my academic career that my research findings were not favorable to the funder and the product or technology. And, so it sort of crossed both spectrums there. And all three times I was not allowed to publish those research results or even to talk about them. I couldn't go present them at our scientific society meetings. I was not allowed to do that because they were not in favor of the funder. And so that wasn't a one-off. That happened to me three different times, and my administration, were the ones that told me you can't publish this and you can't go present it. So that's real, and there's a lot of other researchers that has happened to if they're honest about it, and a lot of faculty members have heard my story and have contacted me and said, "Wow, I've had very similar things happen to me." And most of them that contact me are like, "How did you get out?" Because I'm thinking about getting out. How did you make that transition?
I just went and
So
farmed.
exactly, but I still get that. To this day, I still have people that contact me and say, "How did you do that?" And how do you get out of this? Um,
So
and ironic.
what was your first big swing then? So you left, you had all these ideas. What was the
Yep.
first operation that you started?
Well, it was beef cattle operation, and again, I I had no external funding, anything like that. It had to be funded out of my pocket, so it had to work. I started small, learned a lot of trial and error, and at that point in time, the temporary fencing technologies were not as good as they are today. So it took a lot more work to move cattle routinely, but I started moving cattle daily and at times even multiple times a day. But uh, I made I made quite a few mistakes, but I knew that I had to correct them immediately or I was going to lose everything. So I learned very quickly I had to be highly observant and I had to pay attention to everything that was going on around me and I had to ask a lot of questions. Okay, if this didn't work, why? Why did it not work? And I had to come up with the answer. I couldn't just, and again, there was nobody that I could go to among my former colleagues at the university. And again, they all thought I was crazy, and I actually found out they had formed a betting pool of when I was going to fail. Yeah,
That's always good.
but unbeknownst to them, that was a huge incentive for me. I knew then I could not fail. I couldn't give them that satisfaction. So somehow, some way, I was not going to fail. I didn't know how I wasn't going to fail, but I just knew I couldn't.
So what was an
Uh,
example of
yep.
one of the big mistakes that you made that you quickly pivoted and made an adjustment?
Yeah. Well, I had started sort of reading some things and paying attention to some people that were doing at the time what was called mob grazing.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of very erroneous concepts that were out there around that time period in the late 90s and the early 2000s about that. And I fell victim to some of those. So I thought that I could overstock and just simply moving them every day was the solution. And I quickly found out, oh my goodness, no, I was overgrazing and I was ending up with nowhere near enough grass, to come back around for future rotations. Even though I was moving them every day, because again, I was overstocked. I was using too high a stock density on a day because I also thought, okay, it's all about really high stock density. Boy, that's the secret too, right? And to just do that all the time. Well, when you go real high stock density all the time, you quickly learn that everywhere you do that needs a much, much longer rest period
Right.
before you come back to graze it. But I didn't know that then.
So it was more of
So,
the shave it right down to the dirt, every paddock they were in, and
well, it was certainly over impacted,
yeah.
and not necessarily shaved down to the dirt, but definitely over impacted and not ready for the next rotation.
Hmm.
And so I found myself going backwards pretty quick, and so that meant I had to destock, sufficiently to begin to build, enough cushion there. So that was one of the first lessons I learned. Another one was just simply how to do electric fencing to keep cattle in.
Yeah.
Okay, I had a lot of jailbreaks, so to speak, initially because I just frankly I didn't know enough about what I was doing and about how to keep it juiced enough and everything else. And I was trying to use energizers that were not powerful enough. I was trying to go cheap rather than buy the best that I should have bought initially. So those were definitely early mistakes and things that I learned a lot from, initially.
Yeah, I think those are pretty consistent mistakes too. Well, it's
Yep.
tough when you
Yep.
get in and you see the price differences of some of the energizers and all the equipment, and it's easy to go down the cheaper route initially. But I think most people end up coming back around. It's not
Well,
fun.
that's one
It's
of the
not fun chasing cattle.
no, it's not, or sheep or anything else. And that's one of the first things we tell any client now: never ever scrimp on your electric fencing supplies and materials. Buy the best. You will never regret it, you know. And the same thing with water. Don't scrimp on water. That was another major lesson for me, is that I did not have enough water. And when you're trying to move livestock every day, and you don't have enough water, and then you're trying to, how do I back fence, you know, build lanes, da da da, to get all the way back to water and then back out and get a paddock grazed appropriately. I soon learned I got to have more water, you know, whatever it takes. That's an investment that just absolutely has to be made.
Yeah. Well, we went through some of the same learning experiences. I think everybody does. So then you formed the adaptive grazing method, like you coin it now.
Mhm.
What was the process in kind of forming this theory and idea and concept?
First and foremost, just tons and tons of observation and asking myself lots of questions, a lot of whys. You know, so I was sort of like that 3 year old: why, daddy, why, daddy, why, daddy, right? I had to keep asking myself, why am I observing what I'm observing? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? And the other, so I did that, and that was crucial. You must observe and you must ask why and walk yourself through everything that happened. And if you didn't make good observations, you're not going to be able to reach a good conclusion. You know, the second advantage that I had, though, was I was also consulting at the same time. And consulting is sort of like teaching. You know, when I was teaching at the university, I soon realized I had to study harder than my students, or I would get embarrassed by my students,
Yeah.
right? Because I had to know more than them if I was going to teach them. Uh, and I had to know the intricacies of what I was teaching, not just the surface. And consulting was the same. When you're consulting with other producers, you've got to really study hard and observe hard and think through everything in a holistic manner. And so that the consulting sort of forced me to really hone that skill and to hone it to where I could do that very well. The second thing that consulting did for me was that it allowed me to be on a lot of different farms and ranches in many different regions in North America. And that is something I encourage everybody to do. You don't have to consult to do that, but get out and go to other farms and ranches anytime you can and learn from them, see other things. Don't become so insular, you know, in your own farm, in your own operation, and even go to different regions. You may think, well, that region has nothing to do with my region, but yet you still glean ideas and concepts that can help you. So that was another big part of my learning curve, was just being able to see so many different operations and so many different ideas and concepts being put into action, whether good or bad. So I knew whether something was really working or not, and I could glean ideas, bring them back home, and just adjust them to my specific context.
So when did you start seeing the changes? What was kind of the big aha moment where you thought maybe you had something, you were going in the right direction? And how long did it take?
Well, after I quickly learned in year one, stop overgrazing and being overstocked. Okay, I learned that lesson real quick and stop that. And so within, I would say within a year's time, I began to see some things that really resonated with me. One was I began to see my livestock eating a whole bunch of plants that most people call weeds that we never thought they would eat, and I never thought they would eat, and yet they were eating them very readily and doing well on them. As a matter of fact, doing better when they were eating these so-called weeds than when they weren't. So that was the first realization that I had, and that, oh, I don't have to fight these plants I call weeds anymore. They actually have some benefit and some value, and I can just incorporate them as a part of my total forage base to feed my livestock.
What were some of the weeds that
And
you noticed?
oh, uh, so in my country, some of the most prevalent ones that they began to eat were thistle, uh, ironweed, uh, dog fennel, goatweed, also known as woolly croton, pigweed, ragweed, sumac, and even blackberry and things like that. So, and multiflora rose. So I began to see them eating all of those types of things that I believed they never would eat, and that all of my colleagues at the university were always saying you got to spray or mow or whatever to get rid of them because livestock won't eat them and they're no good for livestock. And I discovered that it was quite the opposite. And so then what I did was I began to collect those plants that I saw them eating that most call weeds, and I started having them analyzed for nutrient density and phytonutrient content. And I quickly discovered, wow, these plants are more nutrient dense than my improved species like my fescue and Bermuda grass and clover and that type of thing, that they were actually more power packed nutritionally than the things that I thought I wanted in there. So that was another aha moment for me.
What did you notice
And
with the thistles right away? Were they eating the flower off of them initially, and then you actually saw them start eating the plant itself?
yeah, they would eat the flower initially, and then they just started eating the entire plant all the way to the ground,
Hmm.
almost like it was candy, and it became when a thistle would grow, they would intentionally seek it out and eat it all the way to the ground. And so they began to favor a lot of these plants that we never thought they would eat. Giant ragweed was another one. They will just absolutely devour giant ragweed, and it is incredibly nutrient dense.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah,
I
so
think
you know,
they kind of strip it down like sorghum almost.
yes, yes, and they would do the same thing with the ironweed. Because ironweed has all of these leaves coming up on, and it can grow about 6 feet tall or whatever, and they would just strip all the leaves off of that ironweed plant and all the way down to the stalk.
So, one of Paul Meyer, our editor, had sent a question for you. I know you'd worked with Paul in the past, but when
Mm-hmm.
we had an event at my farm, and I was trailing behind the cattle and mowing, and it was mid July. I haven't seen them eat the thistles down to the ground. I've seen them eat the flowers off of them. But he was kind of giving me a hard time, saying, "Why are you so concerned about the?" I had some curly dock ragweed. I'm not concerned about. I've seen them eat that. They ate that right away. I said my first year establishing a pasture in a conventional corn and bean field. I think ragweed saved my cattle because it was the nurse crop with all the, the pasture planting that I had, and we were really heavy with legumes. And the only thing I think that saved us from bloat was them eating that ragweed throughout the summer. But is there any weeds that you do get concerned about when it comes to dock, ragweed, or cocklebur?
Not at all anymore. Because we know that we can control every single one of those through utilizing our livestock on them in a proper manner, through adaptive grazing. And now that we've worked all through North America and globally, the honest truth is there's not a plant or a weed that we worry about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of plants that people mention out west, like leafy spurge and, so forth, or cheatgrass, or, in areas in the Midwest, Phragmites and things like that people worry about. And frankly, we've been able to control every bit of that, through proper utilization of livestock.
Yeah, and they end up kind of, those things aren't as prevalent either after multiple years of grazing. Did you
Well, it's
notice that?
successionary.
Yeah, right. Did you notice? I'm really interested with thistle because we do have it. Did it take a few years for them to start figuring out that that was a plant that they wanted to consume, or did you kind of see it? I guess how do I get them to eat my thistles? Because that would be awesome.
Well, the way we did it was just using ultra high density
Yeah.
impact to create that competitive behavior, and then they started eating the thistle and continued eating it from there. And uh, we did a series of workshops at the Noble Research Institute about 3 years back to train them in regenerative agriculture, and I still remember one of the workshops. We were out on one of their ranches, and we had a paddock that had a lot of thistle, a lot of buckbrush, and a lot of blackberry in it. And we had a completely naive set of bred heifers that had been pretty much conventionally grazed and, you know, had not been adaptively grazed at all. So they didn't know to eat these, the thistle and the buckbrush and the blackberry. And so we put them under 1,000,000 pounds per acre that day in that workshop for the very first time. Those heifers never experienced that before. And I asked before we did it, I asked the class, I said, so do any of you think that they're going to eat this thistle, buckbrush, and blackberry? And to a person, they all said, well, absolutely not. They're not going to touch it because we've never seen them eat it before. So we put them in there under 1,000,000 pounds per acre. Within 30 minutes, they were eating all of that and eating it very readily. And then the next day, we went back out and we moved them to another paddock at about 40,000 pounds per acre. So radically different, much, much lower stock density. And it had the same three things: the thistle, the buckbrush, and the blackberry. And before we turned them into there, I said, now, are they going to eat it again today? And they said, no, not today. They only ate it yesterday because you had them at 1,000,000 pounds per acre. Well, we turned them in there the next day, that day, and the first thing they went to was the thistle and ate the thistle selectively and then began to eat on the other stuff. And so they learned literally in one day, in one session, to eat that.
Hi there. Just wanted to interrupt this episode to make sure that you have heard about our Acres 2024 Eco Ag Conference. This year's event will be held in Madison, Wisconsin from December 2nd through December 5th. I think we have put together one of the best lineups for a conference in the regenerative and organic agriculture space. Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, and their team from Understanding Ag, along with Joel Salatin, John Kemp, Gary Zimmer, Mark Shepard, Dr. Nasha Winters, Megan Neubauer, Matt Powers, Nigel Palmer, Will Harris, Jeff Poppin, Aaron Silva, Austin Unruh, Andre Liu, Jay Fuhrer, Steve Diver, and many more. So if you're interested, feel free to give us a call at 970-392-4464 or email us at support@acresusa.com. You can also register online at acresusa.com/eco-ag. So when you say 1,000,000 pounds an acre,
Mm-hmm.
how often did you move them that day? Or did you really,
Well,
because I
just
assume
just twice.
you're not just locking them up in,
Oh no,
yeah,
oh no, because at 1,000,000 pounds per acre, you're not meeting their nutritional
right.
needs, by any stretch. As a matter of fact, you're trampling, you know, 70 to 80% of what's there, and that's intentional.
Hmm.
So the 1,000,000 pounds per acre is only typically about 30 to 45 minutes, and then you're going to let them out into a bigger paddock, and that's what we did that day. So we put a long narrow strip for the 1,000,000 pounds per acre, And after we got the desired impact, we reeled that strip up and let them into the bigger paddock for the rest of the day to meet their nutritional needs.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, that was always something that I was confused about. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
And so what you're saying is create that competitiveness, which I've definitely seen. When you can create that competitiveness, they graze much differently. But then if you do that consistently, or at least sometimes, changing the pulse of, how you're managing the land, they actually do learn to then eat some of those weeds.
Yes, and they do. They eat them very readily. And then their bodies, the work of Dr. Fred Provenza, which has been so profound in learning this. But once they learn that they can eat all of this wide variety of plants, then their body begins to tell them, that, hey, this is good for you. You need to eat more of this. And so then they begin to add that to their dietary repertoire. And Fred's work has found that given the opportunity, if there's the diversity out there, that our livestock will eat between 50 and 80 different plants a day. A lot more of some, a lot less of others, but they're every day they're selecting what their body tells them they need for nutritional, medicinal, and anti-parasitic purposes.
I keep coming back to the thistle. What do they get out of this thistle plant? I know thistles mine, deep down for some minerals that are hard to for other plants to get out of. But is there any other thing that they get out of a thistle plant, in your opinion?
Yes, and again, with working with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet on phytonutrient research, what we have discovered is that, first of all, thistle is mineral rich, as you said, and it really is. It is mineral rich. But then, secondly, thistle is phytonutrient rich. So there's more than 1,000 different nutritional spectra, that comprise that. So it's very phytonutrient rich. And these phytonutrients are antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, and those types of things that the body responds very positively to. And so when they eat the thistle, they feel good. Their bodies feel better, not just because of the mineral richness, but also because of the phytonutrient richness and consuming those anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. And again, that's hundreds and even thousands of those compounds in the thistle that they're consuming. So it has powerful medicinal qualities to it, very powerful.
Yeah. Um, you guys have coined the concept 634 method. I know that's a lot of what you're
Yes.
going to talk about in your workshop. We could probably talk all day because I'm a grazer as well, and everything you say is really interesting. But do you want to give a quick overview of the 634, how you guys came about that, and then how grazers can use that?
Absolutely, and that'll be a big part of our workshops and presentations there at the conference. And so the 634 was born out of our Gabe and my 3 decades plus very practical experience, and also working with farms and ranches all over the world. And so the six principles of soil health. The USDA originally had 4 principles of soil health, and then they added a fifth, which was animal integration. But we added the sixth, and the sixth, which is the first, is context. The other 5 principles don't matter if they're not applied within context of the individual farm and ranch. So you can't be prescriptive about it. You've got to be contextual. And so, very quickly, the other 5 principles are minimize disturbance, armor on the soil, living roots in the soil at all times, diversity, and animal integration. And that's the right type of animal integration. So, those are the other 5 principles, but the first and foremost is context. The 3 out of the 634 are the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And those are solely the searching for the right term here. Don't want to use the term invention, but basically concepts that we develop solely within understanding ag. Um, and again, due to our deep experience. And the three rules of adaptive stewardship are: number one, the rule of compounding. There never are any singular effects out here on a farm or a ranch or in nature or in life in general. Everything that happens creates a series of compounding and cascading effects, and those effects are never neutral. They're either positive or negative. So the question is not, do compounding effects occur? They do. That's a rule. That is fact. The question then becomes, and this is a question we have to always ask ourselves, is what we're doing, the decisions that we're making, and the management we're applying, are we creating negative compounding effects or are we creating positive compounding effects? So that's a rule of compounding, and it's a rule of recognition. We have to recognize that that's what's occurring. And it also applies to epigenetics, and that'll be a part of what we talk about in our workshops as well, is how do epigenetics play a role in all of this. The second rule is a rule of diversity, and that just simply means we want as much diversity as possible. Plant species, crop rotations, cover crop mixes, and diversity in our agricultural and livestock enterprises, and diversity in the wildlife, the birds, insects, everything else that are there. So diversity in every aspect. And then the third rule, and this is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of being able to make ongoing, continuous progress, and it is the rule of disruption. And what we mean by that is that you cannot be prescriptive or formulaic in what you do. The moment you are no longer adaptive and you're no longer regenerative. It's impossible to be regenerative using a prescriptive methodology. And so the analogy that we use to help people understand that is this. Think about a human athlete. So we just had the Olympics this summer. And when we think about all of the world-class athletes that participated in the Olympics, they did not get there by doing the same exercise routine at the same duration and intensity day in, day out, year in and year out. They had to routinely change their exercise routine so that they could continuously challenge their bodies and their minds both to make progress. Well, if we're biology and we work that way, we get better, we improve by challenging ourselves, by introducing planned, purposeful disruptions. Then what about the biology out here that we're dealing with on our farms and ranches? It works exactly the same way. So we now know that we can have this whole series of planned, purposeful disruptions that allow us to be able to make ongoing progress. And just some very quick examples are alter stock density. Don't pick a stock density and think, well, that's the silver bullet. I'm going to stay at 100,000 pounds per acre from now on, or whatever it is. Alter stock density. Alter rotation patterns around your farm on grazing. Alter rest periods between grazing events. Alter paddock configuration or shape. Alter paddock direction. Alter season or time of the year that you're grazing a particular pasture or paddock. Alter the grazing height on and off. Leader follower, bale grazing, planned burns, contour grazing. All of these things are planned, purposeful disruptions that help us to make ongoing progress. And then the four out of the 634 are the four ecosystem processes. And Alan Savory gets credit for being the first to really promote those and to recognize those. And so the four ecosystem processes are energy flow, photosynthesis, and being able to capture photosynthesis to create energy. The second is the water cycle, and we've got a very broken water cycle globally. The third is a mineral cycle. It's also broken. And then the fourth is community dynamics, also known as diversity. So diversity is one of the 6 principles. Diversity is one of the 3 rules, and diversity is also one of the 4 ecosystem processes. So might diversity be sort of important? Absolutely. So we do the 6 and the 3 to optimize the capture of the 4.
You don't want your ecosystem to become lazy. Is a simple way
That's
of putting
correct.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you want to challenge
Challenge
it.
it.
Yeah.
Challenge it.
Yeah. Um, so the economic impact, I know you guys have mentioned that you know people that follow these principles could see a 20% return. Um, what are you seeing as far as the economic benefit? And then I guess if we could talk a little bit about our current state, where obviously cattle prices are super high. I'm interested, when you first started, when you left academia,
Hmm.
the dirty little secret about cattle is you're about 2 years. Well, depending on what you do, if you own the cattle, you're 18 months, 2 years away from getting a return on them.
Hmm.
So what would you tell people right now? With the current state of affairs, how did you get started? Does it make sense to go the contract grazing route? Obviously, these practices will translate over any type of situation, but you know, for someone looking to get into cattle or people that are in cattle right now and just aren't having success, what is the best solution for them right now?
Don't buy in right now.
Yeah,
You know, that you could be making a huge mistake because we don't know when prices will begin to decline. And I'm sorry, but if you believe anybody has that crystal ball, we've believed that for decades now, and it's never been true.
yeah,
They will decline. They will not stay high, and particularly if you're going to buy into a breeding herd. Now is not the time to do that. I would defer from buying breeding stock at this point in time because you're going to pay a greatly inflated price. So if you're going to do anything now, I recommend one of a couple of different divergent routes, or really 3 different things that you can consider. One is, yes, custom grazing. Okay, custom grazing, graze for other people, and you're not taking the price risk on those cattle, and you're pretty much guaranteed your payment on it. So that's certainly one option, and you can custom graze yearlings, or you can custom graze cow calf pairs. You can custom graze heifers to develop heifers. A whole bunch of different options there on custom grazing. Another option is that has worked out quite well for both us and for a number of our clients is what I call stocker cow grazing. And that is buying thin, healthy cull cows, you know, that are easy to add weight to. And you can use them both as a soil building tool while adding weight to them. They're basically just putting back on gain weight that they once had. That's called compensatory gain, and that's a lot easier than original gain. And they're also the only class of cattle that rolls up in price as you add weight to them. With any other class of cattle, stockers, yearlings, whatever, as they get heavier, their price per pound actually goes down, not up.
yeah,
A 9 weight is worth less per pound than a 5 weight. But on a stocker cow, as I add body condition, they're worth more per pound. I can add as much as 20 to 30 cents per pound value to them, by adding weight to them.
so what is the
Uh,
okay,
yep,
beef animals most likely,
yep,
so you're looking for a beef
yes,
animal, and that
yep.
cow probably just weaned off a calf, and the owner of them sent them
Failed to
to the.
rebreed.
Yep. So they're open cows that probably the reason why they're thin is because they just weaned off a calf, and their
Yep,
owner sends them to the sales barn in a cow sale.
yep. That's correct,
But
and
you want to
and
make sure
they're
that they're beef.
yep, yeah, you do. They're a dime a dozen. They're out there in most every market. You see them through almost every auction barn every single week. So you can hire an order buyer to put together loads of these for you. And again, we've done this very successfully. You just got to know what you're doing, and you got to make sure you're buying healthy. The key here is buying healthy cows, and cows that are sound on the feet and legs and sound in their mouth. You don't want to buy broke mouth or no mouth or smooth mouth cows. They got to have teeth. They got to be able to eat. So they got to be healthy and sound. But as long as you're doing that, they'll gain weight very quickly and efficiently, and you can roll them up in price. So they're a good bet, a good risk.
Then do you end up
And
finishing them, or you end up just selling them back?
selling them back into the market, because again, you got that roll up, and you just watch the markets. And as soon as you've got a profit, don't get greedy. As soon as you've got a profit penciled in, let them go,
Yeah.
and you can turn around and do another batch. The third option would be think about starting with something that's much less capital intensive if you're getting started. So think about small species like poultry, sheep, pastured pigs, things like that, that return a dollar much more quickly, and you can generate cash flow much more quickly and aren't near as capital intensive, or even infrastructure intensive. So, again, if you're just getting started, then small species is also a way to begin to get started, and then later on add the cattle.
What do you see with the grass-fed markets? I mean, it's a little disappointing in the last 2 years. Grass-fed markets don't seem to move with the conventional markets, and I'm concerned about that because what is all of our grass-fed producers? What is their motivation to actually take it to the finish line right now? Because they can sell I just talked to someone last week who they wish they would have just sold their 900 pounders, to the conventional market, because they ended up finishing at
Yep.
1,200 pounds, and they got about what they would have gotten for a 950, stocker.
Yep. Yeah. So I've been in the grass fed deal since the 1990s, and I've seen radical shifts and changes. And certainly, there over the last few years, has been some challenging times for domestic grass fed production. So if you have not been solidly locked in with a branded program, or are direct marketing and have a really strong direct market, then you could have experienced some challenging issues. There was a period in time, particularly in the early 2000s, where it was very easy to speculatively finish grass fats and easily get them sold, for good money. And so a lot of people started doing that, and they didn't really have a market when they started. They were just sort of dependent on that market being there when the cattle were fat and ready to go. Well, that's not the case anymore. And so I would heavily advise against people speculatively grass finishing at this point in time. And I would advise them, if you're interested in that, you've either got to start slow and low and build your own direct market, or go get a contract with a branded program, to where you're now in their pipeline. But what I'll caution you on with that is that make darn sure you do know how to grass finish, and you're going to have them ready when the branded program needs them ready, and you're contracted to have them ready. Because if you don't, and something happens and they're not ready, that branded program still needs to fill that pipeline at that time period. And if they have to go to somebody else to fill your slot, they're not coming back to you again. You're done. So there's not a lot of leeway there. Now, the other issue that created a lot of these problems was the product of USA rule, right? Where any imported beef could legally be labeled product of USA. And of course, what does the consumer think? Well, they think it's born and raised and produced in the USA, and it wasn't. It was imported beef. Now, that rule has finally been rescinded, but it hurt the grass fed sector enormously, because we had lots and lots of South American and Australian and New Zealand grass fed beef coming in the intervening years, that flooded the market. And the consumer, because it was labeled product of USA in the grocery store, the consumer did not know.
Yeah.
And they thought they were buying it from U.S. farmers and ranchers. Now, the issue, though, is that recension is still a little ways out. It's going to happen, but until it happens, there's still going to be a lot of that product of USA stuff in the marketplace. And, you know, you've got to be good at marketing. Don't think that you're going to enter a direct market without a lot of work
Yeah.
and building a solid customer base. You've got to be able to dedicate time and effort to sales and marketing. If you can't, it's not going to sell itself. And do not think, one of the biggest mistakes I keep seeing out there is people think that all they got to do is just put up a website and say, I've got grass-fed beef for sale, and all of a sudden people will come flocking to them. Well, there's thousands and thousands of those websites out there now. And how in the world do they know you from anybody else? So just a website is for existing customers, not for building a new customer base. You got to do that face to face.
Yeah.
There's not much other way around it.
All right, Alan, what's one positive thing we can look towards in the grass-fed world? And, I think the biggest thing is these principles and methods it's just cheaper to raise an animal. So wherever you end
Yep.
up selling it, it is the better way to go. But what are some things that you see in the next 10 years that are positive? What's the positive outlook?
Yes. So, two huge things. One is there is absolutely a growing emphasis on the way we manage our landscape and, the impact that we have on climate, ecosystem, greenhouse gases, all of those types of things, and overall soil health and biodiversity. There's a growing emphasis on that, and there's going to be more importance placed on us doing it that way. And so that's what happens, when we're doing grass-fed beef right. We get all of those advantages and benefits. But the second is and this is borne out through the work, and we'll be talking about this in our workshops at the conference, the work of Dr. Stefan Van Vliet and the work that we're doing with him collaboratively. We are discovering that there is a huge phytonutrient benefit. So the nutritional difference is far beyond what we originally thought it was. We were originally thinking, well, it's the omega-3s, the CLAs, they're better. Yes, but it goes much broader than that and much deeper than that. And what we are finding is that as we are slowly revealing these facts to the consumer, it is immediately resonating with them.
Yeah.
And so as the consumer finds this out, there's going to be an increasing demand for regeneratively produced beef, pork, eggs, poultry, lamb, you name it. The consumer is going to begin to demand those types of products more and more, because not only do they know that it's better for the environment, the climate, ecosystems, all of that, but now they can know that it's far better for their health as well. So those are the two biggest things that I see that are going to have a paradigm shifting impact on what happens over the next 10 years.
Yeah. The technology that people are working on, where an app will be on someone's phone, the consumer's phone, they'll be able to take a picture of 2 steaks and you'll be able to see what is in those steaks. That is, I don't know how far away we are from it, but that will change the marketing enormously.
Yep. Yeah. And the beauty of that is that you can't fake that, right? It either is in the product or it's not. And there's nothing that the commodity companies can do to put it in there other than they themselves sourcing from farmers and ranchers that are doing it this way. So they have no other alternative to sort of fight this. It is what it is.
Yeah. All right, Alan, it's been great talking to you. I appreciate it. I don't want to keep you too long. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you and find all the stuff that you guys offer?
Absolutely. So 3 websites for our 3 companies, understandingag.com, absolutely power packed with information for people. Then we have the soilhealthacademy.org that allows them to see where we have schools each year and even apply for scholarships for those schools to defray their cost. And then if they're interested in regenerative verification, our third company is Regenified, and they can go to that at regenified.com and see what the standards and protocols are for regenerative verification.
All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in December in Wisconsin.
We're really looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. And we're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.